Why are you wasting your time on strangers? Those soldiers don't know you.
They don't care about you.
They don't care about you, and they'll probably throw your stupid packages in the trash. A poor college student spent every penny she had making care packages for soldiers she'd never met. Everyone called her foolish. Everyone said she was wasting her life. But thousands of miles away, in a war zone where hope had died, one broken soldier opened her package on the darkest night of his life. What he found inside didn't just save his spirit, it saved his life. And when he finally came home, he made a promise to find the girl who had pulled him back from the edge. This is the story of a student who believed that kindness to strangers is never wasted, and how that belief created a miracle that neither of them could have imagined. In a small college town nestled between rolling hills and endless cornfields, there lived a young woman named Grace. She was 20 years old, a junior studying nursing at the state university, and by every measurable standard, she had nothing. Her clothes came from thrift stores. Her meals often consisted of instant noodles and whatever she could afford with the few dollars left after paying rent. Her apartment was a tiny studio above a laundromat, where the rumble of washing machines served as her constant companion through long nights of studying. Grace had grown up in foster care, bounced between 7 different homes before she aged out of the system at 18. She never knew her father. Her mother had died of an overdose when Grace was just 4 years old, leaving behind nothing but a faded photograph and a lifetime of questions. The foster homes had ranged from tolerable to terrible, and Grace had learned early that the world wasn't going to hand her anything. If she wanted a life worth living, she would have to build it herself, brick by painful brick. But despite everything she had endured, Grace possessed something that poverty and abandonment couldn't steal. A heart that refused to turn bitter. Where others might have become angry at the world, Grace had become gentle. Where others might have closed themselves off, Grace had remained open. She believed, with a faith that defied logic, that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe, that even the smallest act of love could ripple outward and change lives in ways no one could predict. It was this belief that led her to start the care packages. The idea came to her one cold November evening during her sophomore year. She was sitting in the campus library, taking a break from studying, when she overheard 2 students talking at the next table. One of them had a brother deployed overseas, fighting in a war that seemed to have no end. "He hasn't received mail in 3 months, the student said, her voice cracking. "He says it's the loneliness that's the hardest part, not the danger. The loneliness. Knowing that nobody back home is thinking about you." Grace couldn't stop thinking about those words. She lay awake that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling of her tiny apartment, imagining what it must feel like to be thousands of miles from home, surrounded by danger, wondering if anyone remembered you existed. She thought about her own loneliness, the years she had spent in foster care feeling invisible and forgotten. She knew that pain. She knew how it could eat at your soul until there was nothing left. The next morning, Grace made a decision. She would send care packages to soldiers overseas, not just 1 or 2, but as many as she could manage. She would fill them with things that would remind them of home, things that would tell them someone was thinking about them, things that would say you are not forgotten. She started small, with just 3 packages. She used the last $20 from her monthly budget, money that should have gone toward groceries, and bought what she could. Homemade cookies baked in the shared kitchen of her apartment building. Letters she wrote by hand, filled with encouragement and hope. Small items like chapstick, hand warmers, playing cards, and instant coffee. She decorated each box with drawings of American flags and smiley faces. And she included a note that said the same thing every time. "Dear soldier, you don't know me, and I don't know you. But I want you to know that someone back home is thinking about you. Someone is grateful for your sacrifice. Someone believes in you. Please stay safe, and please come home. With love and prayers, Grace." She mailed the packages through a military support organization that connected civilians with deployed troops. She had no idea who would receive them or whether they would even arrive. But she prayed over each box before sending it off, asking God to guide it to someone who needed it most. The response was beyond anything she expected. 3 weeks later, Grace received an email from a sergeant stationed in Afghanistan. He told her that her package had arrived during the worst week of his deployment. 2 of his friends had been killed in an ambush, and he had been struggling to find a reason to keep going. "Then your box showed up," he wrote. "I don't know how to explain it, but reading your letter made me feel like someone out there still cared. Like maybe there was still something worth fighting for. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone. Grace cried for an hour after reading that email, and then she got to work. She started a small organization on campus called Packages of Hope. At first, it was just her, working alone in her tiny apartment, spending every spare moment baking cookies, writing letters, and assembling boxers. But word began to spread. Other students heard about what she was doing and wanted to help. Local businesses donated supplies. Churches contributed funds. Within 6 months, Packages of Hope had grown from one lonely girl with $20 to a team of 50 volunteers, sending hundreds of packages every month. But not everyone was supportive. There was a group of wealthy students on campus who seemed to take pleasure in mocking Grace SF. They were led by a young man named Preston Wright, the son of a real estate tycoon who owned half the buildings in the county. Preston drove a car that cost more than most people's houses. He wore clothes that cost more than Grace's entire yearly budget, and he had a cruel streak that he wielded like a weapon against anyone he considered beneath him. Preston first noticed Grace when he saw her setting up a donation table in the student union. He walked over with his friends, a smirk already forming on his face. "What's this?" he asked loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "Care packages for soldiers?" He picked up one of the boxers and shook it dismissively. "What's in here?" "Cookies and coloring books." "You think this is going to win a war?" Grace kept her composure, though her hands were trembling. "It's not about winning the war," she said quietly. "It's about letting them know someone cares." Preston laughed. "Someone cares. That's adorable." He dropped the box back on the table with a thud. "Let me tell you something, sweetheart. Those soldiers signed up for this. They're getting paid. They don't need your pity or your dollar store care packages. They probably throw this stuff in the trash the second they open it." His friends laughed along with him. A few other students nearby looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Grace felt her cheeks burning with humiliation, but she refused to cry. "Not in front of him." Preston leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a mocking whisper. "You know what I think? I think you do this because you have nothing else. No money, no family, no future. This makes you feel important when really, you're just wasting everyone's time." He straightened up and smiled. "But hey, whatever helps you sleep at night in that little roach motel you call an apartment." He walked away laughing, his friends trailing behind him like hyenas following a lion. Grace stood frozen at the table, her vision blurring with unshed tears. A few sympathetic students approached to offer words of encouragement, but the damage was done. For the first time since she started, Grace wondered if Preston was right. Was she wasting her time? Did any of this really matter? That night, alone in her apartment, Grace fell to her knees and prayed. She asked God if she should continue. She asked for a sign that her efforts weren't in vain. She poured out her doubts, her fears, her exhaustion, and when she finally climbed into bed, she felt a strange peace settle over her heart. A whisper that seemed to say, "Keep going, trust me. Keep going." So she did, thousands of miles away, in a combat outpost in a country torn apart by war. There was a soldier named Marcus. He was 24 years old, a staff sergeant who had already served 3 deployments. He had seen things that no human being should ever have to see. He had lost friends, taken lives, and carried wounds, both visible and invisible. The boy who had enlisted at 18, full of patriotism and purpose, had become a man hollowed out by trauma. Marcus came from a broken home. His father had been abusive. His mother had abandoned the family when Marcus was 12, and his older brother had died of a drug overdose 2 years later. The military had been Marcus's escape, his chance to become something more than his circumstances. And for a while, it had worked. He had found brotherhood, purpose, and pride in wearing the uniform. But this deployment was different. The fighting was relentless. The losses were mounting, and Marcus was struggling with something he had never experienced before. A darkness that crept into his mind during the quiet moments, whispering that nothing mattered, that no one would miss him if he was gone, that the world would be better off without another broken soldier taking up space. He had stopped calling home because there was no one to call. He had stopped writing letters because there was no one to write to. He had stopped hoping because hope felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. The only thing keeping him going was the responsibility he felt toward his men. But even that was starting to feel like a weight too heavy to carry. One night, After a particularly brutal mission that had cost them 2 more lives, Marcus sat alone in his bunk, staring at the pistol in his hands. The darkness was louder than ever, drowning out every rational thought. He had written a note earlier that day, just in case. He hadn't made a decision yet, but he was closer than he had ever been. And then the mail arrived. The supply sergeant dropped a box on his bunk with a casual, "Someone sent you something," and walked away. Marcus stared at the package in confusion. No one sent him anything. He had no family, no girlfriend, no friends back home who remembered he existed. It had to be a mistake, but his name was on the label. Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole. And in the corner, a return address he didn't recognize, from a college town he had never heard of. He opened the box slowly, as if it might explode. Inside, he found cookies, slightly crumbled from the journey, but still intact. A small bag of candy, some toiletries he actually needed, a pair of warm socks, a book of crossword puzzles, and at the very bottom, a handwritten letter. "Dear soldier, you don't know me, and I don't know you, but I want you to know that someone back home is thinking about you." Marcus read those words, and something cracked inside his chest. Someone is grateful for your sacrifice. Someone believes in you. Please stay safe, and please come home. With love and prayers, Grace. He read the letter 3 times. Then he read it again. And then, for the first time in months, Marcus Cole began to cry. It wasn't the cookies, or the candy, or the socks. It was the knowledge that somewhere in the world, a complete stranger had taken the time to think about him, to write to him, to tell him that he mattered, that he was not forgotten. Marcus put the pistol away that night. He didn't know who Grace was or why she had sent that package, but he made a silent promise to himself and to her. He would survive this deployment. He would come home, and someday, somehow, he would find the girl who had saved his life without even knowing it. The months that followed were still hard, but something had changed in Marcus. He kept Grace's letter in his pocket, reading it whenever the darkness threatened to return. He shared the cookies with his men and told them about the care package. Some of them laughed and made jokes about him having a secret admirer, but others grew quiet, and Marcus saw in their eyes the same hunger he had felt, the hunger to be remembered. He wrote back to the return address, not knowing if his letter would reach her. He told her about his deployment, about the difference her package had made, about the men he served with. He didn't tell her about the pistol or the darkness. He wasn't ready for that yet. But he told her that her kindness had given him a reason to keep going. Grace received his letter 6 weeks later. She sat on her bed and read it with tears streaming down her face. She had sent thousands of packages by now, and she had received many thank you notes. But there was something different about this one, something raw and honest that reached into her soul and grabbed hold. She wrote back immediately, and so began a correspondence that would span the remaining 8 months of Marcus's deployment. They wrote about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their beliefs. Grace told him about growing up in foster care, about the loneliness that had shaped her, about the faith that sustained her. Marcus told her about the military, about the brotherhood he had found, about the shadows he was learning to fight. Neither of them expected to fall in love, but somewhere between the letters and the prayers and the thousands of miles of distance, something beautiful began to grow. Meanwhile, back on campus, packages of hope continued to expand. Grace was now a senior, balancing her nursing studies with the organization that had become her life's purpose. They had sent over 10,000 packages and received hundreds of letters from soldiers whose lives had been touched by their efforts. Local news stations had done stories on the organization. Grace had been invited to speak at churches, schools, and community events. But Preston Wright had not forgotten his disdain for her. He had seen the news coverage and resented the attention Grace was receiving. In his mind, she was still the poor, pathetic girl he had mocked at the donation table. The fact that she was now being celebrated as a local hero infuriated him. He looked for opportunities to undermine her, spreading rumors that she was pocketing the donations, that the packages never actually reached soldiers, that the whole thing was a scam to make herself look good. Most people ignored his lies, but some believed them. Donations dropped for a few weeks. A local newspaper ran an article questioning the organization's finances. Grace was forced to open her books to public scrutiny, proving that every penny had gone exactly where she said it would. The investigation cleared her completely, but the stress took its toll. There were nights when she wondered if it was all worth it. And then Marcus came home. His deployment ended in early spring, and he returned to American soil with a single mission in mind: finding Grace. He had her address from the letters, and he had saved enough leave time to make the trip. He didn't tell her he was coming. He wanted it to be a surprise. When Grace opened her apartment door and saw the soldier standing there in his dress uniform, holding a bouquet of flowers and the same letter she had written 2 years ago, she didn't recognize him at first. And then she saw his eyes, those same eyes that had looked out at her from the photograph he had sent. The same eyes she had prayed for every night. "Marcus," she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak. The moments stretched between them, filled with everything they had shared and everything they had yet to discover. And then Grace threw her arms around him and held on like she would never let go. They talked for hours that first day. And the day after that, and the day after that. Marcus told her, finally, about the night he had almost ended his life, about the pistol in his hands and the darkness that had nearly consumed him, and about the package that had arrived at exactly the right moment, as if it had been guided by a force greater than chance. Grace listened with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization of what her simple act of kindness had meant. She had sent that package not knowing where it would go or who would receive it. She had trusted God to guide it to whoever needed it most, and he had delivered it to a man balanced on the edge of eternity. "You saved my life," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't know me. You had no reason to care. But you cared anyway. And because of that, I'm still here." Grace shook her head. "It wasn't me," she said softly. "It was God working through me. I was just the messenger." Marcus smiled then, thanked God for his messenger. The news of Marcus's return spread quickly through the campus. The story of the soldier who had been saved by a care package became local legend. Reporters came to interview them. Television stations ran segments about their unlikely connection, and donations to packages of hope skyrocketed to levels Grace had never imagined. But the sweetest moment came at an unexpected time. Grace had been invited to give a speech at the university's annual honors convocation, where she would receive an award for community service. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and community members. And sitting in the front row, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was Preston Wright. His father was a major donor to the university, which meant Preston was obligated to attend these events, whether he wanted to or not. Grace stood at the podium, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. She told the story of how packages of hope had started with $20 and a broken heart. She talked about the letters she had received from soldiers, the lives that had been touched, the connections that had been formed, and then she talked about Marcus. She didn't share the details of his darkest moment. That was his story to tell, and only if he chose to. But she talked about how a single care package had reached a soldier at the exact moment he needed it most, about how that soldier had survived his deployment, returned home, and dedicated his life to helping other veterans struggling with the same darkness he had faced. And then she looked directly at Preston. "When I started this organization," she said, "there were people who told me I was wasting my time. They said the soldiers didn't care. They said my packages would be thrown in the trash. They said I was foolish for believing that kindness to strangers could make a difference." The auditorium was silent. Preston's face had gone pale. "To those people," Grace continued, "I want to say this. You were wrong. Every letter I've received proves you were wrong. Every soldier who came home because someone reminded them they were loved proves you were wrong. And the man sitting in the second row, the man who is alive today because of a package that almost didn't get sent, proves you were wrong." She paused, her eyes still on Preston. "Kindness is never wasted. Not a single act of love is ever thrown away. The world will tell you that compassion is weakness, that caring for strangers is foolish, that only fools give without expecting something in return. But I'm here to tell you that the world is wrong. Kindness is the strongest force on earth. It can reach across oceans. It can pull people back from the edge of destruction. It can create miracles that logic cannot explain." She smiled, and there was no bitterness in it. Only peace. So to anyone who has ever been told that your kindness doesn't matter, that your efforts are pointless, that you're wasting your time on people who don't care, I want you to hear this. Keep going. Don't let the cynics steal your compassion. Don't let the mockers silence your love. Because somewhere out there, Someone is waiting for exactly what you have to give, and your kindness might be the only thing standing between them and the darkness." The auditorium erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Grace looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed by the response, and saw Marquez standing in the second row, tears streaming down his face, applauding harder than anyone. And in the front row, Preston Wright sat frozen, his face a mask of something that might have been shame. For the first time in his life, he had been confronted with the consequences of his cruelty. And for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. After the ceremony, as Grace was surrounded by well-wishers and admirers, Preston approached her. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, waiting until she noticed him. When their eyes met, it looked Hawaii, unable to hold her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. So quietly that only she could hear. "I was wrong about you. About all of it. I'm sorry." Grace studied him for a long moment. She could see the shame in his eyes, the discomfort of a man who had spent his whole life avoiding accountability. She could have humiliated him, reminded him of every cruel word he had spoken. But that wasn't who she was. "I forgive you," she said simply, "and I hope you'll consider supporting the troops in whatever way you can. They could use people like you on their side." Preston nodded, still unable to meet her eyes, and then he walked away. A man changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. In the years that followed, Grace and Marcus built a life together. They got married in a small ceremony attended by veterans Marcus had served with, and volunteers who had helped Grace build packages of hope. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, whom they raised with the same values that had brought them together: kindness, compassion, faith, and an unwavering belief that every human being deserves to be reminded that they matter. Packages of Hope grew into a national organization, sending hundreds of thousands of care packages to soldiers around the world. Grace became a spokesperson for veteran support, traveling the country to share her story and inspire others to act. Marcus became a counselor at the VA hospital, helping other soldiers fight the same darkness that had almost claimed him. Together, they touched more lives than they could ever count. Preston Wright, surprisingly, became one of their biggest donors. He never spoke publicly about his transformation, but those who knew the story understood. Shame can be a powerful teacher, and sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who change the most. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Marcus received that first care package, the family would gather for a special dinner. Grace would read the original letter she had written, the words that had somehow found their way to a soldier on the edge of despair, and Marcus would tell the children about the night their mother saved his life without even knowing it. One evening, their daughter asked a question that stopped both parents in their tracks. "Mommy," she said, "what made you keep going? When everyone was making fun of you, when they said it was pointless, why didn't you just stop?" Grace thought for a moment, then knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Because I believed," she said softly. "I believed that kindness matters, even when you can't see the results. I believed that God could take my small offerings and do something bigger with them than I could ever imagine. And I believed that somewhere out there, someone needed exactly what I had to give." She glanced at Marcus, who was watching them with tears in his eyes. "And I was right," Grace continued. "I just didn't know it yet." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if absorbing a truth that would stay with her forever. Marcus knelt beside them and wrapped his arms around his wife and daughter. "Your mother taught me something important," he said. "She taught me that the smallest act of love can save a life, that a letter written by a stranger can reach someone at their darkest moment. That kindness isn't just nice, it's powerful. It's the most powerful thing in the world." He looked at Grace, and in his eyes, she saw the same broken soldier she had never met, the one who had sat in a bunk thousands of miles away, holding her letter like a lifeline. And she saw the man he had become because someone had taken the time to care. Years later, when Grace was an old woman with silver hair and a heart still full of love, journalists would sometimes ask her what she wanted her legacy to be. She always gave the same answer. "I don't want to be remembered for what I did," she would say. "I want to be remembered for what I believed. I believed that every person matters, that no one is too far away to reach. That kindness is never wasted, even when it seems pointless. And if my life can inspire even one person to believe the same thing, then everything I went through was worth it." The care packages continued long after Grace was gone. The organization she started lived on, run by new generations of volunteers who had heard her story and been moved to act. Soldiers continued to receive letters from strangers who believed in them. Lives continued to be saved by words written in love. And somewhere in the great beyond, a young woman who had once been told she was wasting her time on strangers smiled, knowing that she had been right all along. Kindness is never wasted. Not a single act of love is ever thrown away. And sometimes, the smallest gesture from the most unexpected person can change the entire course of a life. So send the letter. Bake the cookies. Write the note. Reach out to the stranger. You never know who might be waiting on the other side, praying for exactly what you have to give. Because that's what Grace learned. That's what Marcus learned. And that's what the world needs to remember. The greatest power on earth isn't money or fame or strength. It's love. Simple, unconditional, reckless love, offered freely to those who need it most. And when we finally understand that, we'll understand everything. Friends, if this story touched your heart, drop a comment telling me what lesson it taught you. Let me know what country you're watching from. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. There's more waiting for you right on your screen. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.